Hi friends, welcome back to the studio. Today I wanted to do a little something different. And let me explain. When I first sat down and was trying to decide what I wanted to talk to you all about today, I kept going back to the same thing. What I looked for when I first decided to start my crochet journey. What did I need? What was the information that I really wanted more than anything else that I just wasn't finding? So I thought, why not put that information out there? And maybe it'll help someone else. Maybe it'll help one of you start your journey with crochet. So grab your drink, grab your hook and your projects if you have one, and let's chat. All right. So it's going to start out by me explaining the way that I started my journey. It'll be mixed in with what I think are the best beginner tips that I can give to someone else. Now, this is not an official beginner way by any means. It's not the Pinterest perfect way. It's just the real way that worked for me. And you can take that with a grain of salt. And everyone's starts are going to be different. But these are things that I feel that would have helped me in the beginning. So if you're new to crochet or you're thinking about starting, this is a cozy little guide to what you really need and what you don't. Most beginners start with a very classic setup, right? They start with a hook. Maybe they even start with a set of hooks. And 9 times out of 10, in my opinion, most people start with the I'll say cheaper, but they're not really cheap, aluminum hook sets. And that's great if that's what works for you and your hands. That is not what works for me and my hands because there's no weight to those things. But for some people, they absolutely love them. And honestly, it really truly is just whatever works for you. Most people do start with a worsted weight or a 4-weight yarn, and that's perfectly acceptable if that's what works for you. That wasn't what works for me. My hands are very picky in a lot of ways. If I can't feel it and tell that I'm holding on to it, it's just not going to work. So for me, I use this type of hook. It's just a cheap little generic hook set that I found on Amazon. They're ergonomic. This one is a little on the small side for me, for what my hands like. But this is the larger. This is the 7mm, which when you're working with thicker yarns, you go up in hook size to fit the yarn. Anyway. Those are just the kind of hooks that I use. I don't use worsted weighted yarn. That's not what works for me. It's too thin. It doesn't feel like I'm even holding the yarn. So for me, I use a 6-weight yarn or a super bulky, and that's what works for me. I highly suggest YouTube tutorials. I really, truly do. And why is that? There are a lot of crocheters that do YouTube tutorials. I'm not one of them. I'm not going to be your tutorial host. Not at all. And that's because I'm still learning too. And I can say I can highly recommend that you find someone who teaches in a way that makes it easy for you to learn. A quick shout out here to Bella Coco, because it was her who I was able to follow along with the most easily. And she taught me literally how to make a chain because I didn't know how to do that. I was fresh. I was just starting out. I didn't know anything. In the beginning, I didn't know how to hold my hook. I didn't know how to hold my yarn. And I'm going to guess that a lot of you who are just thinking about starting with crochet are probably the same way. And that's okay. Find yourself a good YouTube tutorial and follow along. I also suggest not worrying about all the stitches in the world because, let's face it, nobody can remember every stitch. There's just no possibility. There's too many stitches. But they all have one thing in common. They're all fundamentally made the same way. The same basic stitches start them all. We'll go over that in a future video. But for now, all of these things are great ways to start. They're affordable, it's accessible, and it works for a lot of people. That wasn't my beginning. I didn't start with the worsted weight acrylic yarns. I did start with a full hook set, the hooks I showed you just a moment ago. I didn't really start with I didn't start with patterns because I couldn't read a pattern to save my life when I first started a year ago. And although I'm better at it today, I still don't enjoy it, which is why, for me, I decided to stick with my originals. I started with blankets, believe it or not. I went with the most time-consuming project one can really make, blankets. It took me about 3 weeks to make my first blanket from start to finish, and that was crocheting for hours and hours a day, every single day for 3 weeks. They take forever. Even with the bulky yarn, they still take forever, but that's okay. The type of yarn that I choose, and I should have grabbed a skein of yarn, but the type of yarn that I use is the super bulky, thick, 6-weighted yarn. I should have grabbed a skein, and I didn't, but that's okay. It's considered a chenille type of yarn because it's polyester. Really, that's the only reason why they call it chenille for a lot of it. Especially with burnout blanket yarn, which is what I'm currently using. It's just a polyester yarn. So I had my super bulky yarn, one hook set to try to learn with, no patterns, no stitch books, just the tutorials that I found on YouTube on how do you start a chain. How do I get my yarn to stay on my hook? Because hello, I didn't know how to do that either. But I wanted to learn. I had instincts. I learned my repetitions. I didn't know rules. So I just started and it worked. And here's the truth. You don't need a lot to begin with. But you do need a few things that give you options. So, what are those things? I suggest starting with one set of hooks, just one set, whether that's the small aluminum hooks or whether you go with something ergonomic, whatever the case may be. These are really reasonably priced on Amazon. They're like $18, I think, for a full set. Depending on if you're getting the larger size or the smaller size, they have both. Take your pick. You can always change later if a set doesn't work for you very well. Had I have bought the aluminum hooks in the very beginning to try to start with, I would have quickly realized that wasn't my hook set. There's no weight, there's no comfort for me and the way my hands are. A basic affordable set gives you room to adjust for tension, and it lets you see which hook size is best for your hands. Your yarn may tell you to use an 8mm hook, but depending on your tension, you might need to go up or down a size or two. Those are things also not everyone knows right off the bat. A set lets you experiment, decide what's right for you. Now, as far as yarn goes, this is fairly easy and also very confusing. First of all, don't get your first yarn off of Amazon. Go into Walmart, go into Hobby Lobby, go into Michael's, go to whatever yarn store you have available to you. Feel the yarns. Feel the difference in the different sizes of the yarns and the different types of yarn, whether that be acrylic or cotton or polyester or chenille, complete chenille, right? Like not just polyester, but like the silky actual chenille. Experiment with those. Feel the texture. See which one you enjoy having on your hands. Because if you purchase, let's say, wool off of Amazon and you get it to your house and you start trying to learn to crochet with it, but you can't stand the feel of wool, it's not going to work for you, and you're going to put it to the side and just be like, I can't do this. I can't crochet. I don't know what I was thinking. Well, you can crochet. Anyone and everyone can learn how to crochet. You just need the right tools at your disposal for you to enjoy it enough to learn it. And that's an important part that I think everyone needs to know. There is no correct yarn. There's no there is beginner yarn, but we're not going there. There's no set in stone yarn that you need to use when you're a beginner. Anything that feels good in your hands. Now, for me, that was chenille. Now, what else do you need? You need a pair of scissors. A sharp pair of scissors that you're only going to use for yarn. And the reason that I say that is you go and you cut paper with this pair of scissors, or you go and cut through a box in order to open the box, whatever. It dulls the scissors. It causes a sticky residue on the scissors. You need something that is only going to be used for yarn, because that doesn't damage the blades in any way. Nothing, they don't have to be fancy. You don't have to go and get the cutest little scissors, just scissors, okay? A yarn needle, that is something that is very important, and there are so many different kinds of yarn needles, it's not even funny. So I have 3 here within my reach, but I have multiple kinds. First off, I bought a set of these plastic yarn needles. It's a dull tip, won't hurt you, but it has a large eye opening. That large eye opening, when you're using a thick yarn, is very important, because you need to be able to thread in your thicker yarn, or any yarn for that matter, into the eye in order to sew in your ends. Again, I have different ones. This is a super long one. I have used it only a few times. And then I also have the metal ones. Now you'll notice on this one, I don't know if you can see it actually or not, but this one, the end down here is a little curved. And this is what I'm using for my plushies, because it lets me get in behind all of those really tight stitches. And again, it does have the larger, can't really see how large it is just because my camera is too far away to see it. It has a larger size eye opening there, and that works wonderfully with my size 6 weighted yarns. Those are the absolute musts that you're going to need, in my opinion. And then the only other thing that you really, really need is patience and curiosity. And those two things I feel like you just have to have right off the get-go, right? You need to have patience. You're not going to be perfect. Your stitches aren't going to be perfect. They're not going to be professional. They're not going to be the best. They're not going to be the tightest. They're not going to be the loosest. I promise you, someone else has had tension that is way worse than what yours is going to be. Now, what is tension? It's the amount of pressure that you're using on your yarn as you're holding your yarn and working with your yarn. So, this is the way I hold my yarn. It's what works for me. But you'll also notice that I use a tension ring. I do use that occasionally. Well, most of the time actually, because it's just what works for my hands. Because my hands don't really like having to hold the yarn, because my hands cramp really easily. Anyway, you don't need fancy hooks, expensive yarn. You don't need a yarn bowl or a project bag or stitch books or pattern books or a full craft room or perfection. Hell, you don't even have to have a plan, to be fair. You don't need to know all the stitches. You don't need to understand patterns, and you don't need to start with a tiny project. Now, a lot of people will definitely disagree with that last one. I started with blankets. I picked the largest thing I could possibly come up with because I knew that I was going to need that repetition of each stitch to complete a project, to be able to learn the stitches and to get good enough with them. So I did the craziest thing. I started with my very first blanket was actually a lap blanket that I made for one of my kids. And it was probably, I would say maybe a 40 by 40. I could be wrong on the exact size. It was meant to be a lap blanket or a throw blanket. And that blanket, I'm not kidding you, it took me 3 weeks. I literally only used single crochets to make that blanket because it was something that I needed to do over and over and over again in order to get that particular stitch down. And then on the next blanket that I did, I went even more bold and I made a twin size blanket for one of my other daughter's beds. And again, I was like, okay, I have the single crochet down. Now I want to learn how to do the half double crochet. These are terms you guys have probably never heard of, and that's okay. We'll get there. But the half double crochet was different for me, and I needed to learn how to do that. So I did a full twin size blanket in half double crochet. And there for the longest time, I absolutely adored that stitch. I used it for a lot of blankets. That twin size bed also took me 3 weeks to make. Twin size bed. Twin size blanket is what I meant to say. That took me 3 weeks as well to make using the half double crochet. Loved it, learned how to do that stitch. Okay, I can move on now. I keep finding myself going right back whenever I'm doing a blanket to the half double crochet because to this day, even though I also know the double crochet and the treble crochet, the half double seems to be the one that I navigate toward the most. It's my favorite. Moving on. You just need to find something to start. Blankets, again, for me, was the perfect beginner because it does build your confidence in your stitches and the repetition is wonderful. They don't require you to have to learn how to do shaping. They don't require patterns. You can just practice your stitches without any pressure. And let's face it, we all love blankets, right? Blankets, for me, made crochet feel like a cozy part of my day, not a skill that I had to master. If you're starting your crochet journey too, You don't have to do it the right way. You can start with what feels good. You can start with what you have. You can start messy. You can start imperfect, because I promise you it won't be perfect. Mine isn't. Even a year later, my crochet isn't always perfect. I like to call it perfectly imperfect, because handmade is handmade for a reason. It's not always going to be perfect. Anyway, I will see you next time here in the quiet place. And remember, be you always. Bye, everyone.